Three, two, one. Welcome, everyone, to the God is Awesome podcast. We are live on Facebook, and we want to thank you for joining us today. If you are listening to us in iTunes or in Spotify or just a replay, give us a hashtag replay if you're in the Facebook group. Otherwise, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast and review it and rate it. It really helps us rank higher in the on the charts, so that more people can listen to these awesome testimonies. And speaking of awesome testimonies, we've got one queued up. Amazing testimony by Pam Torr. Pam, say what's up to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
All right. My name is Aaron. If you guys didn't know, I'm going to be your host for this episode. Like I said, one more time, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing this podcast or liking it with someone who might really gel with this podcast, might understand some of the things that Pam is coming from. It would be fantastic, and it's a good way to be digital missionaries out here. It's such an awesome opportunity and tool to use. Anyway, we're going to kick it over to you, Pam. Pam, just thank you so much for being part of this podcast and being open and willing to share your testimony. I'm super excited to hear about it. So I'm just going to let you take over here. Where are you coming from? How long you been a Christian? Give me kind of like the origin story of you and coming to Christ.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm from England, and I was born in the northeast of England, and in the northeast of England, we're very direct in our speech. We then moved down to the south of England, and in the south of England, it's the sort of place where you wake up at 3 a.m. and you've just worked out what somebody really meant when they spoke to you.
So you're like figuring it out, culture shock.
Yeah, and some people like that and some people don't, so
yeah.
I have to live with that. I came to Christ late in life. I'm a slow learner, clearly. And not only did I come late, I can look back and see where God was in my life. And even though I was mocking people who were Christians, I thought they were what I would call long socks and plaits, boring people.
What was that one more time?
Long socks and plaits. When I went to school, we were allowed to wear tights. This was quite a progressive move. But there were the studious people still wore their long socks, and they tended to have plaits. So it's become an adjective for me.
I think that's an English term. I'm not sure if we.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are braids in the hair.
Plants. Okay.
Plaits.
Okay.
So, they would be like that. They wouldn't be sort of following.
They're nerdy. They're like Ned Flanders. They're like,
boring. They
gotcha.
don't have to be happy, says Pam Torr.
Okay.
So,
and
that's what I thought of Christians too.
Gotcha. Any particular reason? Did you know any just from afar?
Yeah. When I started my nurse training, I met my first proper Christian.
Okay.
Believer, and she was a totally different person. She still went to these prayer groups, but they used to always tell me they were praying for me. I used to be outraged at their arrogance. and I say these things because I think now we need to remember there are other people like me in the world thinking way, and the way to sort of reach them, it's different for everybody.
Like Christians are arrogant and that they're know-it-alls and stuff like that.
Yeah, but this idea to tell someone you're going to pray for them infers that there's a deficit in a way. I suppose that's how I took it. And my retort would be, go and pray for yourselves, little knowing that, of course, they did.
So they said, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, we'll do it.
They needed Pam Torr to tell them. Oh,
for sure.
Anyway, so I was well into my 50s, and it came about because I was running a hospital, and it needed to be pulled into the 21st century. And we had a lady there who was sort of living in the hospital, wrongly diagnosed, and she had Munchausen's.
What was that?
She had Munchausen's disease, like faking paralysis.
Okay.
Lots of people have this. And so she was dictating who would care for her, when they would care for her. And as the hospital improved, so we were admitting more acutely ill people. And I found the nurses responding to this woman. So I had to change things. So we developed a program a multidisciplinary approach to try and improve her quality of life, to help her to see, and also to get her able to live in assisted living and
Okay.
not be in the hospital because it wasn't functioning as a hospital. Anyway, having got ready and got a start date, I decided she needed an advocate. So we had a part-time chaplain who was a vicar in the town. He was an Anglican vicar. He was also a monk. And he agreed to be her advocate. And he would every so often come up to my office pleading her case. And it was always no, very often, very few times even a compromise, because we really were on a mission with her.
Okay.
One day, I don't know what he said, but I can remember what I turned around and said, you have to remember, Nicholas, that I don't believe all that rubbish in the Bible.
Mm.
I think we have to be good and kind and help each other, but I don't believe all that. He got up all in a huff. As he got to my office door, he turned around and he said to me these magic words that did it all. I'm sure you love your sons, but who will know their name in 2,000 years' time? And off he went.
Oh,
And
he just left you and said that and just
oh, yeah,
left?
he walked off. I mean, I suppose I must have said something pretty
We
rude.
call we call that in America a mic drop moment. Okay. We just
All right. Okay.
we drop the mic and then we just walk off.
My first thought was, what's wrong with him?
Oh
But
yeah.
then as I turned to get back to my work at the desk, my next thought was, but he's right about that. Nobody will know their name.
Yeah.
That was a Tuesday, and it's hard to believe this, but for 3 days I could not work. That was every time I picked up a pen or something, that was in my head. Well, on the Friday, he appeared at my door. I put my hand up and said, don't you come in here. And I said to him, I haven't had, and he took a step in, and I mean it. I haven't had any peace since you left on Tuesday.
Oh,
And he then invited me for lunch the next day, Saturday, and my head was screaming, no way.
yeah.
This guy is not somebody I feel warm towards. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just a
Just
non-event.
the idea of eternal, like an eternal perspective that was in your head, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
But my mouth said, oh, okay. So the next day I go to dinner with him, and there became many, many dinners. And I adore this guy now. I mean, he's a very, very clever man. I think he's amazing. But he asked me what sort of things did I think were rubbish. And I started with the virgin birth. Now, people listening might be shocked at some of the things I said because it appalls me, but I said them. Anyway, I just sort of said, why did she have to be a virgin? It over eggs the story.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
And then as he's pouring the wine, I said, and that's another thing. Some people think this wine is the blood of Christ. I mean, how can any thinking human being,
Yep.
Now, every time I threw one of these out, and Noah building an ark, I mean, in the middle of a desert,
This giant ship, really? Like,
real.
yeah, yeah.
He
You
never
had
told me the answer. He never told me the right answer. He
okay.
just said things like, well, this is how I see it. Every time, this is how I see it. And every time he did that, I found myself thinking, well, that's reasonable. That's
Yeah.
okay. He was a master at sussing me out, how I was and what I was like. He
Yeah.
got me and I fell for this one. Would I read some books so that he could and critique them so he would know what age group? I mean, I fell for that. So I'm reading these books. One of them was a book on the saints. I mean, who would do that? And
Sure.
mine is saying, why are you reading this? But yet I'm obediently reading it. Then,
Yeah.
of course, he gave me Mere Christianity, which
C.S.
was
Lewis.
a stopper. It was like,
Sure.
oh.
Sure. That'll mess you up for sure.
Well, Maggie Thatcher had upset the health service to a degree where it was getting impossible to care for patients. I left the health service, my
Yeah.
first retirement, and a former staff nurse was running a ski company as well as her job in the French Swiss Alps, and she rang me up 11 o'clock one night. Would I go and manage the ski company? Now, what did I know about managing a ski company? But I learned if you can manage something, you can manage anything.
Sure.
Anyway, I go along. Nicholas tells me I've got to have a Bible. He tells me which one to buy, the NIV. And he gives me this book that I now know is like a daily devotional. But it was, I don't know who wrote it, but it was called Read, Mark and Build. So you know the go. You read a bit in Mark and then there's a commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of plod through it. A child of 5 could have read this. So you'd sort out the ski company, and then I'd have time in the afternoon. I'd be lying on the grass just reading through this. And I got to the bit about divorce, and I'm telling the grass, well, that's not fair. You know, I didn't, although I called for the divorce, I didn't expect to be divorced. And I'm talking to the grass. Then I plod on, thinking, you know. And then I get to the bit about Easter. Now it's nearly Easter time, and I'm in the French Swiss Alps, so the bells are all ringing down in the valley. And I said to the grass, I don't understand this.
You said
Because,
the grass.
it seems to me that if Jesus did, the fact that he was born is the biggie. I couldn't understand why his dying was such a big thing. I mean, isn't this appalling? But that was me. So I said to the grass,
So wait. So your problem was that he was born. There's the birth around Jesus Christ. That was your problem.
if he was born,
Oh,
why is
if
it
he was born.
not the big thing? Why is he such a big thing when he died?
Mm.
That's just sort of where I was at, really. But the grass replied to me. I heard this audible voice, and it said, you don't have to understand, just accept.
The grass said that to you.
And I didn't look round to see who was speaking. It was an audible voice, which I've now heard 5 times.
You heard an audible voice.
Audible voice.
You know how crazy that old
I,
Pam would say you were,
I know.
right?
You can't tell people because they think you're wacky.
Yes.
Oh, anyway, I heard this voice. Didn't even look round. Somehow I knew, on reflection, sort of later. At the time, I just got up, went all the way down the mountain to the telephone, rang Nicholas, and I said, I think I've just become a Christian. His response was not yippee-doo, gush-gush. It was very sort of bland. Anyway,
It's like, oh, that's about time. Ah,
I know.
about time you got
It
Christian.
went there, you know. It was incredible. And because I was sort of so behind, I suppose, long story short, I got a job managing a care home for the elderly for OMF, Overseas Missionary Fellowship, that was CIM, China Inland Mission. So here are all these former missionaries. I got a master class in Bible study.
Sure.
It was absolutely amazing, so God-given. And
so you're saying, so you came to Christ later in life.
yeah,
You were a nurse, and there was this terrible patient who was sick in the head, and she was trying to use the hospital as a hotel, basically.
yeah.
An advocate came in here, Nicholas, a vicar, and he just kind of put it to you an internal perspective about your kids. And then from there, you just started asking questions, and then one day you found yourself talking to some grass, and you hear a voice back.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's kind of crazy, actually. So, I mean, Christians would have a hard time. I'm like, what does that even mean? But you know, if you're someone who, from a skeptic's brain, right? Like, where the boat, the virgin birth, fire, and all this stuff, really, really, and then grass is starting to talk to you. Like, I just think that's pretty ironic of God, or I don't know. Like, there's some kind of humor that has to be there or something. I'm not sure.
I just find it odd that I didn't question it. What's that say about me?
That's interesting. That's interesting. That you're just talking to grass, like, yeah, okay, yeah. That's funny. Well,
But
and I guess God,
I knew that in a way God had spoken to me in some way.
yeah,
I don't know. And I now believe, you know, people sort of say, oh, what's God's will in my life, this, and the other. If God really wants you to know something, he'll find a way to tell you.
sure.
He'll find an individual way to tell you. And I think because of that, I believe that he sort of really needed to get through. I was talking about stories I'd heard as a 5-year-old that I'd never gone back to. You know, people talk about unbelievers having a hole. I was not aware of any hole, so I never understand that. I did
You
not
were
know
you
well.
weren't missing anything
No,
essentially.
it wasn't.
So
And I
yeah, let's talk to me about like where you coming from. What created that skeptical mind when you met God? Like what tell me about your childhood growing up.
Well, it
And
was abysmal. I had a mother and father, but I wasn't parented. So looking back, I mean, I looked after myself. Basically, all they gave me was a house. My father sexually abused me. I'm one of five. My eldest brother used to regularly be beaten so badly by my father. And I,
what what caused your father to do this? What are the things that he did?
who knows, awful man.
Okay, really?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Um, so, I left home as soon as I was legally allowed to leave school. I just
gotcha.
I left school and I never went back.
That must have sit with you? That must have formed you in some way, right? Like,
Yeah, I think I felt invisible. Um, Fortunately, I was a bridesmaid for a cousin up north when I was 11, and what a different house. This lovely aunt, really weird. She used to go to chapel to show off what she was wearing. I mean, I loved her dearly, and she was really a nice person, but had the wrong idea about chapel, as she called it. But
sure.
anyway, she said to me one day, I was up there for about a month, that I was odd. When I asked her why, she said that there have been sweets in the drawer and you've never had one. And my reply was, well, I didn't know they were mine. And
Mm,
her reply was, well, they're everybody's.
yeah,
I didn't have that concept.
right.
And she said, anything in this house you can have.
You had a concept of fear and rules growing up.
Rules and nothing. Don't ask because
Yeah.
you're not. So I learned not to ask, which I still find a problem now to
So
ask.
so tell me about like, that's got to be traumatic. I don't want to just breeze past like sexual abuse from a father, right? Was it all the time? Did
Yeah,
it?
till I was 16, I left. It was
And
horrible, 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 and I put up with carrying that till I was in my 40s, and I found myself doing a master's degree. I'd just been diagnosed with lupus. I was starting divorce proceedings, and I just started a new job. And it
mhm,
wasn't just a new job for me, it was a newly created role, so you had to shape it. Now, that was the good bit in my life because I'm good at that, I can do that. So that was how I got through those days. But I
work. That's
made
how you
a
got through.
very good friend, and she came to see me after work. She was also a nurse, and I was in hospital accommodation at this stage. And you grow out of that sort of life. And I didn't have the lights on, I was just sitting. And I mean, this appalled her. And in talking to me, because I was saying I don't think I can cope, and she did two good things. She gave me one sentence about coping, which I still think about, and she made me talk about the abuse. And she had me talking every time we met. It was, and what it did was trivialize it.
Hmm.
And it took about 6 months, but after about 6 months, um, I stopped having flashbacks. And I would have these flashbacks and just literally stop in my tracks and have this
Clear, clear into your
physical
40s.
sensation. Sorry?
Clear into your 40s. You were having flashbacks.
Yes.
People carry this throughout their whole lives, and
Yeah.
you do too.
Yeah.
It's crazy. That's
But
crazy.
I talked it out. So that's all I think, you know, happened. Plus, I left the marriage. My husband was committing adultery. And I didn't realize until I left the marriage that he was actually putting me down all the time.
So wait, so you had a so how was your marriage then? Like, what is happening right now? I don't want to breeze past through like a childhood of abuse and then you got married and then what was happening during that marriage?
Well, we had our second son, and now I can see he's on the spectrum of autism, Asperger's. So he was not an easy child at all. And of course, I didn't know about Asperger's or autism or whatever. He was so clever, it was frightening. And I actually didn't care how clever he was. He could read at 2.5. We lived in Germany when he was 16 months old. He spoke fluent German to the woman who used to deliver the milk. I mean, he was just like that. He would ask questions that got beyond me being able to answer.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't happy. And I didn't care how clever he was. I thought he can be clever when he's 40, but he needs to find happiness. He just wasn't happy. So, that was my thing with him. And my husband was useless with that. I mean, he just was. He didn't understand.
What did your husband do or didn't do? Like
he
what?
was in the military to begin with, so we
Okay.
talked a lot. And I don't know if it happens in America, but in England, if you have problems and you're in the military and you're the wife, you're neurotic. The sort of automatic branding that you get.
You're the problem.
Yeah, that's right. So I didn't get any help with Paul. And there were loads of other sort of physical problems with him that I had to get sorted out. And as I said,
What do you mean physical problems? What does that mean?
he had encopresis, which it's soiling without sort of warning. And I found a friend who saw what was going on, knew a consultant at St. Thomas's Hospital who dealt with this, and he checked him out physically, and there was a physical difficulty in him having his bowels open. Okay. So he did this minor operation. It's called a bougie, but most pediatricians won't do it because you have to stretch the bowel bigger than their heads will sort of make them feel is right. And this guy did it, and we never looked back from then on. But he was 9 before we got that sorted, all because a friend was concerned and was researching for me.
So your husband was no help at this time, right?
Useless, yes.
Yeah.
He couldn't cope with that sort of thing. He wanted his children to do as he said and when he said, and
And so how did the affair happen? What happened with the affair and stuff?
Well, again, slow to learn. That's my sort of message in life. I'm very slow to learn.
We're all that sometimes.
Oh my goodness. He would just come home very, very late. He had a high position working in Harrods, which was quite a journey. And, a very responsible job. And of course, I'm just assuming that he's having to work. And then I don't know, something must have been going on subtly that I wasn't registering. But one night he came in with a bunch of flowers again. And it just exploded in my head.
Huh.
And for the first time in my life, I started to swear.
How did that make you feel? Like what did you go through mentally? What did you think of yourself?
Initially, I was so angry. It was beyond reason. And then it was, okay, I'm not going to be one of these people who just forgives and says there's no problem. And so I immediately went for legal advice. It got to the stage where it wasn't safe for me to be in the house. And if you can believe, it was the most awful divorce. And
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? It wasn't safe for you to be in the house?
Well, given what my husband was doing, I was told, first of all, I was told to stay in the house. Otherwise, I would lose some sort of possession rights. I don't know. Then it was, you'd better get out the house before he sort of attacks you. He couldn't cope with it at all. Even had his friends, who I didn't know, in London, ringing me up and advising me because they were listening to him. We'd never had to worry about money. Whoever had money paid for this, that, and the other. We were just easy about money. That totally changed. And he just took everything he could possibly take. And I was left totally vulnerable. So I also had some idea. I thought I was this person that, you get divorced. But when it happens, no. It's total rejection.
Yeah.
So back to feeling, I suppose, I obviously don't matter very much.
And that started when you were younger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it continued.
Younger, it was more, okay, here I'm 7 years old thinking, okay, I'm invisible, so this is what we do. I just sort of fixed it, but, anyway.
So So before we continue, there's some people here that I know their stories, and they know that they've been sexually abused by family members. Do you have any advice for, let's say, a young girl trying to cope with this? Maybe it's happening or it has happened, and they're maybe in, the early years. Do you have any advice for them?
I think if it's happening, get out,
Sure.
because there's no way. And then I think
It's not normal. It's not acceptable.
no, that's right. And it's wrong. It's so wrong. It's a particular crime in my view. There's no other crime like it. And then I think for me,
Well, you've got these like, that's supposed to be like the protector, right? Your protector, you're the head of the household, and
rape, it's not rape of a child. It's totally different. And people who haven't experienced it can't seem to grasp that.
yeah,
We had a judge in England, I'll never forget him, he's probably dead by now, but there was a 9-year-old girl who was raped by a boy, and the judge said, well, she probably was asking for it. And this was the headline.
that's disgusting. Yeah, that's disgusting.
So anyway, but I would say for me anyway, it was talking it out until it diminishes. And talking it totally, don't sort of
Sugarcoat it.
say it all.
Yeah, drag it all out into the light.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah. So if you have gone through some kind of traumatic experience, like, don't diminish it. Talk it out with someone who's trusted, who could keep these secrets. And
that's important.
did you talk to a professional? I forgot. Was it just a friend? I forgot.
It was a friend who was a nurse, and her counseling, she wasn't a qualified counselor, but her counseling skills were excellent.
Okay, so she had some training. She had some, gotcha. Okay, so you grew up through a sexually abusive home, feeling invisible. Then you get into a marriage, and then how long was did the affair happen, and how did the divorce go down? You said it was a nasty divorce.
Oh, my solicitor had counselling. Can you believe that? That was the final straw. I learned that my solicitor was getting counselling.
Wow.
Because of my divorce. Oh, yeah. It was awful. It was awful. He stalked me. I was terrified. It was horrible.
He stalked you?
Yeah.
Well,
he knew I'd been stationed at the hospital, and he didn't know the geography of the hospital at all. He would walk around the accommodation areas, and there were quite a lot. And he had this particular whistle. Now, that's all he did, and it terrified me. I would hear this whistle. Isn't that weird?
That's weird. That's some weird stuff right there. That's not...
I know, but it scared me.
Why did he do it? Did he do it just to, like, is he doing it just to mess with you? Is he trying to get you back?
I had no idea. I don't know if he was just trying to find out where I was. I've no idea. But
that's weird.
And then one day he arrived at the hospital at lunchtime. We were all having lunch, and I was sitting with, the matron and senior staff, and she suddenly saw him come in the back door. And I mean, they all sort of knew, and she just said, "Get up and go to my office and sit in there. Your husband is looking for you. Just come to the back door." So I got up and did that till she came, and it was horrible. You've no idea. But what was ridiculous was I was scared over a whistle.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's probably a way, like, to psychologically put himself above you still, or have some kind of rule or like authority over you, just to, like, I don't know, because he's a small person, and he's a small man, and he's a small boy, and he wants, like, some measure above you.
Yeah.
And so he came up with a whistle, or just being around, or being imminent presence and stuff like that. When did that end? How did that all end?
Finally, I got divorced in '86. It was it did end, and I made a sort of vow that I would never. I was totally financially vulnerable. It was horrendous. I had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, it's part of God being in my life before I knew how it's gone from then on. But I sort of thought, how do people ever get married again? Because that sort of blind trust has gone.
Yeah.
There would be an interview.
Yeah. So you have this baggage, right?
Yeah.
A whole lifetime, 40 plus years.
Yeah.
finally get into your, what you said, 50s, right?
50s, I met Christ, late
50s, you
50s,
met Christ. How did
40.
that change? What were the biggest things that changed in your life, like mentally? Uh, what changed?
Um, because I had that, what I call the master class in Christianity, I asked somebody who was leaving the staff, a nurse who was a Christian, to critique my work, what I'd done. And she finally, after she'd moved, she wrote me a letter which reduced me to tears because it was the truth. And it was a wonderful truth. All the things I'd done, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm really, oh, good, good, good. And then she said, but I think you think you're working in your own strength. And I did.
What does that
And
mean?
that God was doing all this, not me. God was using me to make all these things happen and improve things and everything. Whereas I thought it was my own cleverness.
Mm,
Not in a cocky way. I just thought I was capable, you know?
sure.
And I learned that, oh my goodness, I learned that. I also learned one day, you have no idea, the place was a mess. And I had no night nurse for this night. And I exhausted all my abilities to get a night nurse. And this little, I called her a walking saint. She was about 80, shorter than me, can you believe? She spoke fluent Chinese, had been over there and lived among the Chinese. And she came along and she said, Pam, dear, you look worried. And I said, yes. And I thought, you people have no idea of the real world. This is me mocking again in my head.
Were
And
you a
she,
Christian here?
sorry?
You were a Christian here, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
New Christian. And she said, give it to the Lord. And I swung round. She walked past me, give it to the Lord. And I swung round through gritted teeth.
yeah. Oh,
I have given it to the Lord.
I'm already a Christian.
And she came back and looked up at me and she said, well, you obviously haven't because you're still worried. And off she went. I could have killed her. I just
Yeah,
thought,
yeah,
what do you know about anything?
yeah.
Of course, she knew everything. Anyway, so what I did, I went back into the office and I sat there and I said, okay, Lord, I'm giving this to you. I haven't got a night nurse tonight. I know I can work tonight, but I can't also, having worked today, work tomorrow. And you know tomorrow this is happening and I have to be here. So,
Uh-huh.
and I threw it up. I went out and I walked around the grounds for 20 minutes and I looked at the grass and the flowers and I didn't even think about my night nurse. 5 to 5. And I looked at the clock and I thought, okay, God, I've got the message. I'm working tonight.
Uh-huh.
And the phone rang. And this voice said, hello, I'm a nurse. Have you got any work? And I said, you don't want to work tonight, do you? She said, I'll work tonight. Two simples. I said, you will? So she said, yes. She said, how do I get there? So I told her. Oh, she said, I'll have to get the train. I'm in Sidcup. I was in Kent at this date. And I said, there isn't a train from Sidcup. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. Yes, there is. Well, there didn't used to be. I said, okay, fine. And then get a taxi, leave me the ticket, and I will pay your fare, and blah, blah, blah. Put the phone down. And I thought, wow, God, you left that close, but thank you. Phone rang again. She said, you're right, there isn't a train. I would have to go all the way into London and then come out again. And she said, I would do that, but the cost of doing that would take all the money I'm going to earn. I said, I'll pay your fare. Can you pay your fare and then I'll pay you back in the morning when I come back? Yes. So she came. I put the phone down. And then it was, okay, God.
Yeah.
And what I learned was, if we talk about giving it to God, you have to actually give it.
Sure. Sure.
I
It sounds
learned
like,
that.
it sounds like you're probably the most reluctant giver, right? You're like a reluctant Christian and didn't want to get saved and you got saved and reluctantly give it. I'm not going to give it to God. Okay, fine. And then you turns out, I think that happens a lot. We want our own sovereignty, even if we are Christian, even when God does change our hearts. We just
Well, I think for me, I have to learn the practicalities. I had to learn that, not just
yeah.
believe it. I had to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting like that, and a lot of people struggle with that, and that's where I think when they want it, when they want control, that they get anxiety as well.
Yeah,
When they want control, they get the worry and the anxiety, and that's why I
yeah,
think God says, give up the worry, give up the anxiety, and
yeah,
you'll be kind of free. There'll be peace.
exactly.
What are some passions that you find yourself in nowadays? Like, where is God taking you? Where is God leading you? How is God using you right now?
I think it's wonderful that, I have the Monday group, which I really enjoy doing. I went through a phase of, it's wrong that I enjoy it so much. I'm not doing God's work. I'm doing Pam Torr's thing.
Where you
I
is this about me or is this about God?
it so much as I do. Do you know what I
Sure,
mean?
sure.
Anyway, I got over it. I'm passionate about well-being. I really am, because I just see so many people who are heading towards illness, and I wish I could divert them. So I really feel strongly about getting people to understand that well-being is more important than having good health. It's
Well,
not.
well, it's been such a part of your testimony and your life so far, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
what do you mean by well-being?
I think it's about why I'm passionate about it. One of the aspects of well-being is hope. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around an unbeliever who's tried to kill themselves and has no hope. How do you give that person hope? It's words. And it's not words they want to hear. But believers, we have that hope. The hardest thing to give somebody, and we have it already as believers, which leads me into the rest is easy. If you just see what it says in scripture about, getting your emotions, understanding what makes you angry, and understanding that you can change it once you understand what the trigger is,
Hmm.
you know and it's about affect, it's about having self-esteem, self-confidence, having a role and a purpose. And if you like, I did a lot of stuff with care of the elderly, and one of the main problems there is they become a burden because everything has to be done for them. So I used to find things for them to do back. So they're receiving, but they're also giving.
Hmm.
That's another. I have a passion about elderly care. That's the one thing I sort of miss, because it's so easy to get it right, and most people are getting it wrong. I'm very opinionated.
How do people get it wrong? Give me two examples and give me two examples of how to do it right.
If you go into a care home and everybody's in a wheelchair, even at meal times, they need help, they need advice, they need teaching. Um, if you go into a home and everything is done for the people, and they've lost their identity, and they have no value to
Mm.
anybody, that's wrong, and it's not necessary. You can do better.
It's instead of serving them, you're helping them in the way,
Yes, you help them, but you give them a way of giving back.
doing it to
you know
themselves.
we had a little old lady who, I had her folding napkins for the meal times, and the joy that gave her.
Sure.
And she folded more napkins than we ever needed, but
That's,
she
yeah.
never got fed up with it. It
Hmm.
was within her capabilities. And we made a great thing of, oh, thank goodness you've
Yeah.
done that.
That's something interesting because a lot of people are talking about how people don't need approval or not approval, don't need money. They more need function.
Yeah,
They don't need to be taken care of. They need to be able to provide a function or a value into some kind of community, and that
yes.
does wonders for something
Feel.
in here. So how does that intertwine with your faith, and how does that intertwine with Christianity? Because you said something about self-esteem, self-confidence, and function, and how does that intertwine with faith and hope? How does especially hope?
Because I think if you read scripture, it's there. It's a book of counseling. I believe in cognitive behavior therapy is what the Bible is. But you have to do it. You have to do the work, and you have to. I feel I need to convince people that they must do it, because I need to tell them what's ahead of them in their old age. If they keep on being a worrywart, or they keep on having anger. How many people do you know who are quick to anger and have gastric ulcers? You know, that's a classic. Our emotions make us ill.
Hmm.
It matters to me because I've seen the other end, and it's avoidable. And one thing about this, another thing on my soapbox, I get sick to death of the way we pray for illness. We've honored illness so much.
What do you mean?
If you look at any prayer list, the illness is this long, then we have travel. Where's people's divorce, debts, struggles? We should be, if we're really a family, we should be able to be asking for prayer for all these personal things.
Well, people don't want to share debt. You know what I mean? Like
And when,
people want to.
don't tell me I'm in a church family.
Yeah. Sometimes people are embarrassed. You know what I mean? People are embarrassed to share, like, hey, yeah, I'm in debt and I need help out of it. And I believe that debt is a sign of materialism in someone's life. You know, like so you're saying prayers should be.
Many people see that it's okay to pray for health. It's not okay to be vulnerable.
Hmm,
You know, health is allowed. It's not your fault, blah, blah, blah.
sure.
I think we have to do something about that. People shouldn't feel embarrassed, judged, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know that's very grand, and I know there are people in the church that will go on judging. But if we're really a believer and we're reading scripture, we should know that that is not what God wants.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with because we're then a master of something else. You know.
If I was in charge of sunlight,
Hmm.
at a stroke, I would ban those prayer lists.
What do you mean? You ban the prayer? You mean we're not going to be able to pray for anyone else?
I
Don't
would
pray
say,
for this person. Don't
yeah,
pray for this person.
yeah, be embarrassed about being ill, but let's
Hmm.
pray for the real things.
Okay.
You
You
know,
don't think illness is a real thing?
yes, it is a real thing, and
Okay.
it's unpleasant, but it's not the only thing. But it's the
Gotcha.
thing we've made honourable.
So maybe not just illness. Maybe add to the list.
Well, I would shorten the list too,
Hmm.
because especially in this country, I'm going to say something really controversial.
Sure. Go ahead.
You're in this country, you are taught. I watch the adverts and it says, tell your doctor that this tablet, this pill, tell
Sure.
your doctor. I sit here thinking, why does the doctor not know? Why
Hmm.
did he do all that training? What motivates him to come to work if we're all walking in with the advert that says, you've got to give me this?
Yeah.
And I think over here, because of your insurance structure and everything, your pill poppers, you know, and it's just like at the slightest thing, people are going to the doctor. They're not giving their body a chance to react or do anything.
Hmm.
It worries me because I've got to find a doctor who'll put up with me saying, I
Sure.
don't need all those blood tests. You know,
Sure.
I've just
So
got to.
so you're coming at it from from a nursing background here,
Yeah.
for years in the field, and so a lot of experience and stuff like that. Let me ask you, how does someone promote well-being and health from a Christian standpoint to a non-Christian? Right, you've got all these opinions. How does it practically look like? What
I think
advice can you give me to do that for other people?
give well-being, to talk about well-being to an unbeliever because they don't have prayer lists. So they see you as someone who can give advice. So you can go in on the well-being thing with, look, why don't you try doing this? Because it will actually stop this happening, blah, blah, blah. The believers are the people who think if I could put it on a prayer list. So illness becomes the thing that we pray about.
I see what you're saying. You're saying like
Of
we're
course
just
we should pray for illness, but to the extent that we do,
yeah,
we
pray about the life situations, life
yeah,
circumstances too,
that's
because
right.
all that affects your health too.
And if you haven't got one person you can go to for prayer, what do you do with all those other things? You know?
Hmm.
And
I don't know.
I don't have a prayer partner. I wish I had a prayer partner, you know, for the things I want to pray for.
What would you pray for?
I would pray about things. I would pray for my loneliness. I get lonely sometimes. And I beat myself up because, you know, I'm not on my own. I have to keep reminding myself. But
Yeah.
loneliness too is a killer. So I know that. So I know I have to sort of deal with it. I would pray for all sorts of things. What I've noticed, if I'm praying for someone after the service in church and I'm praying with a second person, we're both praying, we complement each other. I come in from one tack, that person comes in from another tack.
Yeah.
So if you were praying with a prayer buddy, I think that would happen too. You would serve each other in that way. I
Yeah.
think that's good.
Hmm. Well, I think yeah, I think prayer prayer is given to us by God like as a way to like kind of step into God's plan for the world, right? It's like it's our part, and we take part in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
He answers prayer. There's all this thing. There's like a mystery to prayer around it too. But I think you're right when we say that there's a restriction to prayer. When we kind of pray about certain things all the time, and we don't
Yeah.
pray about other things that we should be praying about. And you're kind of highlighting the importance of a prayer partner here. But why haven't you found one yet? Or do you just try it, or like?
I haven't tried because I sort of don't know how to go about it. You know, when you come into a new place, everybody, if you like, is sorted. Their friendships are all fixed, ready. So it's quite difficult to sort of break into that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, like you go into a church and you're like the new kid, like
Yeah, yeah.
that's a problem. That's a big problem. I think a lot of churches and even well-meaning churches face that problem.
Yeah.
How do you think we should break that?
I think there's lots of things. There's a good book being written by somebody local, actually, called Ruth Buchanan, talking about singles in church. And I think she comes up with not just some of the obvious difficulties, but with sort of things that you could do about it. I think one of her things is that married couples should be aware that there are singles.
Sure, we cater to a lot of married couples at the to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
to the detriment of singles in a lot of
yeah.
cases. Yeah,
And a lot of the preaching, in a way, quite rightly, it's about families.
sure.
And, you know, we're always being told we're in a family, and actually, we're not. But then I'm from a fractured family, so I don't think I know what a family should be.
Sure.
You know,
That's interesting too.
that's a problem. Plus, I've learned not to ask, and all that I still carry to a degree.
Interesting.
Weird.
Interesting. What do you mean by you've learned not to ask?
When I was a child, there was no
Oh
point.
yeah, that's right. So you don't
It
ask.
became a learned behavior,
It's a habit. It's a learned behavior.
and
Yeah.
it's hard to unlearn, isn't it?
Sure. And so we have to fight ourselves on both ends of it, right? Like on the church end, try to be mindful of people who have come from broken family histories and might not understand it. And on the other side too, where hey, we might need to ask or might need to raise awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's the result of sin in our lives and
Yeah.
in Christians' lives. It's just what it is.
I think quite rightly, you could look at somebody my age and, well, go and sort it out, go and work it out. You're allowed to have an expectation I can solve my problems. That's
Sure.
what I do.
Yeah. And there's a lack of empathy there. There's a lack of compassion there.
Yeah,
So
because
like,
people don't know where you're coming from, really.
sure.
Why you can't do it.
Yeah, and maybe now more people know at least where you're coming from. With your.
Would they ever believe I'm quite shy? No, because I've got so many opinions.
A little bit of a firecracker. It's all good though. That's what makes for a good podcast. Well, Ms. Pam, thank you so much for joining us on this evening on this podcast. I want to finish off with one last question. Why do you think God is awesome?
Oh my goodness. I can look back in my life and see that, I didn't just not know God. I sort of worked against knowing him and mocked people. I mean, dreadful. And yet I can see things happened, especially in my nursing career. Things happened that had no explanation at the time. I can remember saving a baby's life because I got there in time, and I don't know why I got there in time. And now I know that it was God.
Yeah.
And I looked so many times, this creature, he bothered about me. I mean, I'm just insignificant, and yet he was there all the way through, even down. I started training as a nurse because I needed a roof over my head, and yet it was the best job. I loved it so much.
In hindsight, you see God working through your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a very special way.
Yeah.
You know, it would have been all right if I was just somebody who didn't know God, but I was somebody worse than that.
Sure. And he's been there all along with you.
And he still bothered. Yeah.
He's still bothered to. I don't think that's right. I think he didn't bother to. I think he intentionally picked you from the very beginning. And so, for sure.
It is absolutely. I mean, he took away the lupus. It's just gone.
Yeah, you had lupus. That's crazy. We didn't even talk about that.
And it went. The bit we probably haven't got time to talk about, but how I used to pray that I would forgive my father. Are we running out of time? And
no, please tell me.
Lots and lots of, please God, I want to forgive my father, blah, blah, blah. And nothing was changing. And I was feeling, this is really bad, I'm supposed to forgive. And I went for lunch with Nicholas, and he said to me, we were having a pub lunch, and he said, well, I told him, that was the first time I told him about the abuse and I couldn't forgive my father. And he said that perhaps the prayer was wrong, and the prayer should be, I want to forgive my father. And I looked at him and I thought, that's the truth, because really the truth is I don't want to. And I was overjoyed. And as soon as he saw that reaction, he said, no, Pam, the prayer should be that you want to to. So I was even one step further back. So that became my prayer, day in, day out, all the time. And one day I was vacuuming and I stopped to make a coffee, and I was still praying this. And this voice said to me, you don't have to do this anymore. And as I went through that doorway, I felt a weight that I didn't know I was carrying go.
Yeah.
And I have done nothing. I've never prayed since. I don't address it in any way in my thoughts. I feel somehow God's just said, stop.
It's taken that from you.
In some way. I can't explain it, but
yeah, it's interesting that you were
say, well, have you forgiven your father? God's told me I don't have to do this anymore.
And that's the thing, because as a Christian, we know that we have to forgive, but we don't necessarily want to, and that's interesting. That's probably that's a big thing.
It is. We have to understand, and I mean, Nicholas had it right. You want to.
Yeah.
I was even further back than I thought.
Sure.
And now I don't even have to. God is awesome.
Yeah.
Totally awesome.
That is awesome. Well, Ms. Pam, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. If you guys are out there still listening, we want to thank you for listening and making it this far. Give Pam a shout, #GoPam in the comments, or be able to share this video with someone who is struggling or has struggled with the same stuff. We're here to support each other. I mean, you heard her.
Talk to people if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's got a lot of opinions and definitely wouldn't mind some prayer too. So please, this is all about a community. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us. We love you. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thank you again, Ms. Pam.
Thank you.
See ya.